So hello there and welcome to the July instalment of the Janome Stitch Club UK. My name is Julia and I'm one of the Janome educators, and every month we go through some of the stitches, feet, techniques, etc. on your Janome machines, and there's a little project for you to practice some of this stuff. Slightly different this month because rather than actually being live on camera, what I've done is I've pre-recorded this video just to let you know, but I am live in the chat. So if you're asking any questions during this live video, I can answer straight away in the chat, okay? We were having a few issues with the quality of the video, so we thought this would actually make things a little bit better for you at the other end. It was a bit shaky last month, and that wasn't me, I promise. Okay, so this month, I've been having a little play with two new feet that I've had, which are the beading feet, and you get them, I will do a close-up of these, but you get them in narrow and wide. And what they're actually for is, you've probably seen this stuff around and about, obviously beading, and you get it in different widths. So lovely, but you know, unless you're doing sort of weddings, etc., that kind of thing, you're probably thinking, oh, I'm not going to need a beading foot, when would I ever use it? So I thought maybe this month we could have a little look at it, because one technique that I really love is called couching, where you actually stitch across the top of embroidery threads, cords, wools, all sorts of different things. And these feet are actually really good for this. Some of the top end machines, you can get an actual couching foot which you use with the free motion setting, but if you're a bit nervy about free motion, or you want your couching to be a little bit more on point, and I would certainly say if I was using this technique for dressmaking rather than decorative arty stuff, then this is the way that I would go, because I would want a much better finish on the underneath, and that's a lot easier to achieve obviously with the actual stitching on the machine rather than the free motion stitching, because the underneath always looks so much better. So if I just show you, for example, this is the underneath of one of the samples that I've done. And you wouldn't get quite that same effect if you were using free motion. What you also can't get, of course, with free motion is you can't use the actual stitches. So on this one, I have actually used one of the satin stitches, which is specifically for this kind of a job. And I've used it quite a few times because I also have another foot, the cording foot, the actual cording foot, which a lot of these stitches are designed for. But the cording foot, which we will look at later on actually, because that too is a lovely foot. I mean, frankly, you need them all. We know that. I'm looking desperately for it. There it is. So this is the cording foot, and it's got a little sort of flip up bit. But as you can see, it's quite narrow, the sort of cord that you can use. We're talking embroidery threads, very fine crochet threads as well. I've used on this before now. I often use it over gold and silver metallic threads for effect. So we'll look at this one a bit nearer to Christmas, I think, because it's quite a good one for Christmas. But what you've got with these feet is, as I say, there is a groove in the bottom here. I'll put a little picture up in the corner of them much closer up. So like I say, we've got a narrow one and a wider one, which means that you can then start looking at much thicker threads which will sit in that groove like so and go over the top of those. So I just thought this was a chance to have a little play with that. So I'm going to turn us around onto the actual machine and have a closer look at the feet, and just do a few samples of some of the stitches that you can use, and then we'll go on to the project, which is a zipper pouch, bog standard zipper pouch, which I think probably everybody's made. But as I say, I think these sorts of techniques are really fun to play with. So let's turn you round and take a look at the stitches on the machine. Okay, so here we go. Let's have a little look then at the feet. So as I say, I think you can see here that there is a groove. This is the wide groove one, and then we've got the narrow groove one here. And if you compare them to the cording foot, look, you can see those little grooves there are tiny. So obviously if you're going to be looking at much thicker stuff like this, then the cording foot isn't actually going to be quite what you need. It's not going to do it in quite the same way. But the design of these, as I said, is to go over the top of things like beads like this. The narrow one I've used before on these little, these are my favourite, these little tiny beads here, which, as I say, you just buy by the metre usually, and you can get gold and silver as well. So for sort of Christmas projects and things like that, this is a really nice way of finishing things. More importantly than the beads, and I'm just going to take those out of the scenario for a minute, I think is when you start working on things like this. So these are cords and wool, anything you like really, because I think like with a lot of these techniques, you'll find, you know, you've probably got a bag of, you know, different scraps of wool and different trims all over the place. I don't even know what this is here. This is something I just picked up a bag of stuff in a charity shop a long time back, and I just keep it there. So this is just twisted. Look, lots of, it's probably a wool actually. It feels very stiff now, it's been twisted. But things like this can just look so nice as a finish on your projects. Now, if you do not have these feet, okay, you can give it a good go with this one, which is the open toe satin stitch, the custom craft foot, which I often talk about. The difficulty with this, and I would always say actually it's worth having a go, because if you're not sure if you want a foot, then try the techniques first to make sure you might think, oh, love that, and then you know it's worth the investment of the foot. I always think it is worth the investment, because very often, even if I don't use a foot straight away, I kind of start doing something and then I'll think, oh, I know what would make this easier. This one, I find that what I then need to do is maybe to be a little bit more careful about where I'm going, because what you get from this is when it's actually held down on the machine, is because it's got this groove, it kind of holds it in place. So let me give you an example. Now, if I actually draw, and I'm going to draw a squiggly line and another squiggly line. So the first stitch I'm going to look at is just the bog standard zigzag stitch. And first off, I'm just going to put on my custom craft foot, the zigzag foot. So if I come under here and line up, so this is one of those fun wools. Now I'm using a different colour thread because I kind of want you to see the stitch. So I'm on my regular zigzag. What I have done though is I have widened out the zigzag. So I have taken it up to, on this narrow foot, well, I'm going to be using the narrow foot in a minute. I would normally go about 2.5 to 3 for the actual stitch width, so that it's going to go across here. Got a bit more choice with this because it's got a much wider opening, but you have to bear in mind the groove under here. So, you know, it's not going to be happy if you put something really, really thick under here. The other thing is I don't want it to be a really tight stitch, so my stitch length I'm going to take up to about 2. Okay, and as I say, on this one, the thread that I'm using is a kind of contrast so that you can see what's going on. So I'm just going to do the first couple of stitches and see where I am. Now you'll notice on this one I'm having to judge a lot more what is going on here. So let me put my pivot on actually. There we go. And I'm going to stop that side and go round like this, and then lift and turn, basically lift and turn. So I'm trying to keep an eye on where this is and where my line is. And actually, because of the way this wool in particular is structured, it's not too bad because it's quite fluffy. But if you look up close, so as I say, I've used a contrasting thread here so that you can kind of see the thread. But if you were using this in a picture, for example, and you wanted to use it for, you know, grasses and things like that, how lovely is that? Because we've all got loads of different scraps of wool and stuff that work really nicely. If I, however, change that foot out and I'm going to put on the narrow groove one here. Ooh, going to unthread myself as usual. There we go. Okay, and I'm going to use exactly the same thing just as a comparison. So I want to make sure that's in the groove. A couple of stitches to start it. And what I can do with this, I'm now going to take my pivot off because this isn't very curvy. And what I find, I don't know if you can see here, but I'm actually lifting this up so that it settles in that groove, which means that I don't have to do the stop, lift and turn in quite the same way. And as I say, if I wanted to do these nice sort of fairly organic curvy effects there, it's much easier with the actual beading foot. Okay, so that's just a quick little look at those. If I put the thicker one on just to show you the difference, where have I done with it? There we go. And go in with a much thicker cord. As you can see, this is way thicker than what I've been using. So because this is thicker, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually take my stitch width, and what I'm looking for is getting that needle so that it's dropping to the side here, and then I know it's going to go over. So what is really important here is if you're using your zigzag, we've looked at this before, that if you have got an M marked for your zigzag stitch, this is the one that you want, not the right hand, not the left or right. You want it middle, because then it's actually setting itself from the middle, the sizing. We looked at that I think when we did the Easter thing, didn't we? So here we go, I'm on something much wider, so let's start here. So as you can see, look, it's going right over the top, and again it's sitting in that groove so that I can curve it round if I want to. So that you can see that stitch. Whoop, if I can get it out. Too thick. Holding it down like that with the zigzag. Okay, so that's That's nice, isn't it? We quite like that. That's okay. However, what if we wanted to do something a little more fancy? So what I want to do now is look at some of what I would term as the couching stitches. So what I'm looking for are things that are wide, and also I think it works when it's like a zigzaggy kind of thing. So things like this or this. I've had quite a lot of success as well with this one, the honeycomb. Also things like this and this. So anything that's going side to side, look, these cross stitches. And then if we go further down on our chart, one of my all-time faves is this one here. Because if you're using two different colours, which I'm going to in a second, this one here, it goes on either side. Usual thing is going to apply with all of these stitches. You may need to adjust, particularly on this sort of technique. It's very much about the width, because it's whether you want to see any stitching on either side. So I'm going to go back in, and I'm going to go into that lovely little satin stitch that's going either side, and I've got it on, it's coming up as its serving suggestion, so the width is 9. Now I'm looking at this thinking, that's going to be too wide, isn't it? So what I want to do is take that stitch width down, and I've done it previously on this, and I find that this, with this foot, we're looking at a sort of between 6 and 7. Going to depend on what you're actually stitching with. So if I put that down, the needle down, I'm just making sure that it's right on the outside, and then it's going to skip over to the other side as it does it. So I'm just going to go, my fabric isn't straight, but I am just going to go straight with this one. Didn't think this through because this is much more coordinated, but I think you'll still be able to see what the stitching's doing. And as you can see, it's going side to side. Again, I'm lifting this very slightly so that it's sitting nicely in that groove, which means it's feeding it in nice and straight. So if I wanted to curve it around slightly, with this sort of stitch you can't do a huge amount of curving because the stitch is going, it's quite a long stitch, it's going from side to side, but you can get a faint curve in there. But look how nice that is. And that's just a bit of pink, I think that was just a bit of wool, a bit of random, yeah, look, bit of old wool, who hasn't got that lying around, and a bit of cord as well. But so very nice finish on there. So let's have a look at maybe one of the other stitches. Again, I'm going to go for something that's going side to side. So why don't we have a little look at this one here. So we're on mode. Actually, we're not on mode because that's a different machine. I keep using that book because it's nice and large, so I can see, and I'm hoping that you can see. Right, so on Betsy the Atelier, it's actually stitch 13 in heirloom, and actually the heirloom stitches are kind of the ones to look at very often for these kinds of things. I'm very partial to an heirloom stitch. Right, so let's get some thread up. I'm going to go again with those same colours so that we can just compare and contrast. The important thing when you start this stitching is getting it up straight. Two little hints I would say for that would be either start with it at the back here so I can hold it down and then I can trim it up, so start off your actual work, or if you're on if the piece of work that you're doing is slightly bigger and you're going to trim it up afterwards, you could always use just a little bit of tape or something like that just to hold it in place as you start. So this one, you're going to actually see a wee bit more of the stitch itself because it's coming out to the side. I've taken the stitch length down, stitch width down, sorry, again, but it is generally a wider stitch. So look, still rather nice though, isn't it? So this is the kind of thing that we're looking at basically, is getting these sorts of effects. And I think you can see when I'm actually sewing with it how that groove is actually really helping with that job, isn't it? First though, I'm going to just do my regular straight stitch, tiny stitch, because I'm going to just go all the way very, very close to the edge just to hold that in place so that I haven't got any pins in my way. So let's say I'm on quite a small straight stitch and I'm very, very close to the edge. Once again, I'm using that open toe foot so that I can see exactly what's going on. I'm going to pop my pivot on. There we go. As I go around, I just rounded off these corners because depending on the stitch you use, because I want to use that satin, that couching stitch that goes either side, it's harder to get a really pointy, a sharp corner on there, so I've rounded the corners off, which makes it much easier to go around. It's going to kind of depend on the stitch you're doing and what you're actually using for your couching effect as well. Like I say, I just want to hold this down because that's going to help, number one, when I'm going around here, but also for when I'm actually doing that couching. I certainly don't want pins in the way. I know I haven't Bonder webbed it down as well because I haven't actually tried Bonder web with this particular product. It seems to iron okay on the back, so you probably could use Bonder web with it as well, or heat and bond, something like that, but I would definitely recommend a bit of baking paper over the top and just check your temperatures first. It's bad enough just getting glue on your iron, let alone melted cork. I don't know what that would look like, but I'm pretty sure it wouldn't make for pleasant viewing. Right, so I've just done that just to get that all down, trim that up. So now I'm going to go around the edge of the heart, and again I could use this teeny tiny little stitch if I didn't want anything showing, but I'm going to go for something a little bit more decorative in. I'm going to use my triple stitch because that will show a lot more. So it's still a straight stitch, but, and I'm literally about 2 millimeters from the edge here. I said it when we were doing the tea cozy that hearts are the they're the one if you want to practice your foot control, etc, etc. You've got it all going on. You've got the ins, the outs, the curves, the straights, the points. So as I'm walking round, I can do that lift and turn a few times, back on a little bit of a straight bit. And I'm always trying to move when I'm using this stitch on the forward, because it walks forwards and backwards, and then one stitch at a time. So it's going backwards, it's gone forwards, and it's going to go forwards again, and now I can pivot out of that corner. Just around this curve. This is the time, like I say, I've put the pivot on. If you've got a knee lift, knee lifts are brilliant for these sorts of jobs as well. knee lift does the same job in that it lifts the press foot for you, so you've got both hands free on your work. And walk forward so that when I turn, my next stitch is going forwards. This bit's nice and easy because we're on a very slight curve and then a home, literally the home straight. Okay. And when I get down to the bottom, you'll notice I'm not pressing the lock off. I don't know if that was in shot, actually, it possibly wasn't. Instead of pressing the lock off to finish this stitch, I press the back stitch and hold that in, because on these sorts of, I term them as a continuous stitch. I find that the back stitch stops exactly where I want it to stop, rather than, I don't want it to necessarily finish the whole stitch in this case. So I've just got that nice little top stitch going around there. And like I say, because it's that triple stitch, obviously it shows a lot more. So I'm going to change this foot out and put in my beading foot, and I am on the wide beading foot for this next bit, because I'm going to use that satin stitch and I'm going to use double twine. Because of the nature of this stitch, where is it, look, going over each side, it does work better if you've got even numbers of strands or whatever, so that as you're going round it can separate off each side. When you're looking at your stitches, you may want to think about that. I've had a bit of a play with this stuff, and as usual I've gone down a bit of a rabbit hole. I'll put some pictures up on my page, etc., about this, because honestly there is so much that you can do with this. Is just the tip of the iceberg, as usual, with all of this stuff. Okay, so I've taken my stitch length down and I'm taking stitch length up, sorry. Stitch length has gone up and I'm taking it up to 0.6, and the stitch width I've taken down, because I'm on 9mm, but that's a bit too wide, so I've taken it down to 7. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start on an edge on a straight bit, and I'm going to start in here. I'm going to pull those two bits together at the back so that my string is nicely sitting together, and then I can start, you know, I'm looking at this, and if I drop that needle, yeah, I think that's still a little bit wide, so I'm going to take it down to 6. Can't remember what I did before now. Did I write it down? Should have done, shouldn't I? Okay, so let's go with that. So off we go. So while we're on the straight, my little thread was holding that there, so I'm going to just trim that. Sometimes it does that, doesn't it? If you so keep an eye on those threads, because sometimes when you start a stitch, if it's not walking forward, it might just be what happened there was the thread was just slightly wrapped around the foot there. So there we go. So there we go, it's walking through. A bit happier now. Just suddenly thought I probably should have checked the bobbin situation, shouldn't I? So if you notice, again, I'm lifting into that curve so that I can wedge that nicely in there, and then when I lose the line, which I have just done, I'm going to stop again on the outside edge, exactly as if I was using the zigzag or something like that, so that my next stitches are on the outside edge, because I was on, and the curve was on the outside. So I'm on the straight now. But what I can do is, you can see here, so I'm going to go in with my scissors and snip right up close, because when I get round to the other side, what I want to do is butt that up and stitch across the top of it, okay, so that there isn't an obvious start and finish. So off we go again. So I'm just coming into this last corner here. I've just sped it through the last bit so you didn't have to watch all of that. This technique was couching is used an awful lot in church vestments, like if they're stitching over precious with gold and things like that, and they want to give it more shape. So the next time you're, you know, stitching your religious garments, this might be the technique for you. If you want to find out a little bit more about the history of that, you might want to check out the Royal School of Needlework as opposed to me, because I don't think I have quite the knowledge. So I'm now coming down back to the beginning. So do you remember I said I wanted to butt right up here? So I'm gonna measure it up to where it is. There we go. Cut that, and then get something like my sort of screwdriver or an awl or whatever you use, just hold those flat so that that's probably in the way as you're looking. I'm going to take the pivot off for this bit actually, so let's put that down so I can hold that until the very last minute as we come in across. Again, because it's got that nice groove in it, it's kind of doing it for me, it's holding it, so I can stitch across back onto where I started. There we go, and then cut it. And oh, my bobbin thread may not be sufficient. Do you know what though? We don't care, because we're finished. Woo! Okay, so back out and have a little look. There we go. So I've gone all the way around, and as I say, this is where we started and finished, but look, hardly noticeable because we've done that whole butting up thing. So what I was saying about this technique used in dressmaking, for example, as I say, if you look at the underneath, that looks great. So I think that if I've used like a felt here to stiffen it up, because these jeans have got, I think these ones have got a slight stretch in it by the feel, and they're a lot older in, I can tell by the sort of the fading, etc. But going back to our samples, imagine if you were using this on, say, you know, winter. It may not feel like it's approaching, certainly not today, but if you were using this on something like a boiled wool jacket or a wool skirt, a coat, something like that. You've seen them, haven't you, in the shops where they've got all this lovely couching on, so you could certainly give this a go around the collar of a jacket or the hem of a skirt or something like that. What you do need to check when you're doing that is, I think you can probably see here, look, where it's curving slightly. I mean, I've got a stitch and tear on the underneath, because I did say to you about these sorts of techniques of always using something to give it a little bit of stability, some form of stabilizer. And when I'm doing these sorts of things, particularly in clothing, I would usually use something like stitch and tear. I'm just tearing that off. effect so that you can see, because once I take the stitch and tear off, it kind of lets the material do what it wants to do, but what it's doing while it's on there is just giving you the best possible stitch. So stitch and tear or soluble, something like that. And also just keep an eye, especially when you're using your ziggy-zaggy stitches, you may want to just loosen off the top tension slightly. Again, that's going to depend on the thickness of your fabric. So I haven't, I've got some boiled wool and I want to make a jacket. So if I do anything like this, I will check that all out, check the, you know, the length of my stitch, etc., etc., plus the top tension, because if it looks like this is pulling slightly and this is pulling slightly on the top, then just loosen off your top tension very slightly. It's a little bit like when you use a twin needle effect, actually, that you end up with this slight sort of pulled tunneling effect. So once you've done the heart for your actual zipper pouch, I have done similar to the back, but I've just kept it on the straight here. So I've just cut these little 3/4 inch strips, because this literally was the tiniest of scraps. So I've put my regular foot back on and I'm just doing the zipper pulls here. So I've done those little tabs, I've laid the zipper between here, and then I've stitched 1/4 inch, and then what happens is I flip that back and then I can top stitch 1/4 inch in. What I'm trying to do all the time is avoid, you always get those plasticky bits that stop the zip, and you'll notice I always cut these zip pulls way longer because I find them easier to when I come to the next part of the process. So I'm just going to top stitch that down. You can hear it as it's going across your zipper there. Okay, so that's ready to go in, and then we need to layer it up. So what I'm going to do is right side, and the right side is the bit with a zipper pull on the top, to right side. Okay, and I'm just lining that up, and then I need my actual lining piece, which has of course gone. Okay, so again I am doing, let me come on, there we go. So I've now got that bit in, so there's my zipper pull, so it's right side to right side, right side to right side for the lining, and they're going to sit between those two. And like I say, I always do these little tabby bits just that bit bigger so that I can see. So I'm going to pin those together, or clips if you've got clips. I always think clips are actually that bit better. There we go. Okay, and then we're going to put our zipper foot on and stitch down here. If you're I'm not going to do it now because of the time factor, but if you're new to zippers, I would always recommend, rather than pins or clips even, baste that, tack that in place. You'll find it much easier if you're actually getting the zip in without having to worry about pins, because look, you can see they kind of distort everything, don't they? Now the zipper pull is here. I can feel it underneath, so I'm just going to pull that down a little bit further out of the way, and then I'm going to put on my zipper foot. There we go. We will return to zippers at a later stage. Like I say, there is various videos on this, but so what I need now is to move my needle position across, because my zip is here. I can feel it here. So I want my needle, which at the moment is on the right hand side, I want it on the left hand side. So if you go into your regular stitches, you have got a setting that takes you to the left hand setting normally. So I can start and feel my way along. Like I say, I've left the pins in here, but I do think it's better now. I can feel it's beeping at me because it knows that the bobbin's down the end, so I can feel the zipper pull here. So I'm just going to lift, swivel that round. Notice I've left the actual needle down, and then I can just slide that zipper pull up out of the way, swivel it back round again. The zipper pull is now back here. Drop my presser foot, but because that needle was down, I haven't kind of jumped out of alignment. So along we go to the end here. If you're on one of the 7 mils, your zipper foot will look slightly different, but it still has a right and a left side. You put them on, it's got 2 bars. Right, but like I say, we'll have a look at the zipper feet another time in more detail. So what you've now got, if I flip that back, we've now got that zip is in on that side. So what we now do is we now make that sandwich again. So right side to right side on the back piece at the top here. I would normally press this back out of the way actually, and then it holds it all in place. And then this again, we're doing right side to right side, but the zip is sandwiched completely in between those layers. So just make sure that everything is lined up nicely. Let's say pin it or use your clips. There we go. Taking my time with this because I think it doesn't matter how many times. If you haven't done a zip for a while, or you've never done a zip before, in fact, I always think zipper pouches are about the best way to start actually. Okay, so I'm just looking because my bobbin, it's telling me my bobbin's running low, but do you know what? I'm just going to risk it because who doesn't love a bit of bobbin chicken? So again, my needle is on the left hand side. So I'm up here and my zip pull is, oh, it's right down this end this time. So I will just pull that up a little bit actually. So I'm just going to go in. Hang on, let's find it under all the layers. Bring it up to the middle. There we go. So start stitching along the top there. And I can, yeah, it's here. I can feel it. So before I actually get to that, it's here. So I'm going to stop, needle down, lift, just swivel it round. You might not need to swivel it all the way around. And then, I'm hoping you can see this, get in underneath, and I've just pulled that up out of the way so it's now beyond my foot up here. I'm just going to hold those all together. Look, it's getting a bit cross with me now because of the bobbin. It's very funny. because it's one of the best things about this machine. Several of the machines do this, where they give you the warning of the bobbin. But you know, sometimes I just like to live dangerously. See, plenty. You do actually set the amount. To be fair, I could change it in the settings, but I normally just have a look. That's what's nice about having this clear bobbin, because I'm thinking, oh come on, I've got enough there. But you know, like I say, I quite like that element of danger. So there we go, that's done. I will trim up now all of that extra stuff, and then all we have to do then is open it out, give it a good old press just to make sure it's all sitting nicely. Run the zipper up and down just to make sure that it's not catching. You can top stitch it if you want. I don't know that I'm going to bother on this actually. And leave the zipper slightly open before the next part of the process, where we're going to fold it open like so. And at this point I can clip and pin the lining together, the front and the back together, trim away all of this excess now because I don't need that anymore. I just find it helpful to hold the zip in the right place. Make sure you are catching all of those layers, so I'll trim that all away. Final bit is to sew all the way around. I've clipped it. Just make sure that when you're laying your edges together, if I'm going to trim all this away, and I try and make sure that it's matching top and bottom, because I'm only doing about a ½ inch seam. So what I'm going to do is just trim this all up, because it just means you've got more likelihood of making sure that all of the layers, because that's the important thing, is to get all of these layers stitched together. And we're going to leave the birthing hole on the bottom here, so I'm not stitching across here. Okay, so let's get it in. I'm just on my regular foot. You might want to use your walking foot at this point. I normally find that just the regular foot's normally okay for this. Depends on how thick your denim etc is. So I'm just going to do a forwards and back, because that's where we're going to turn it. Just realised I've got a tiny stitch length on there, which is going to be really boring. And around we go. So like I say, I'm more like a sort of ½ inch here than a ¼ of an inch, just to make sure I am catching all of those edges. This bit's easy because it's just the lining, but once you get onto this bit where it's a bit thicker, and as you come to this bit where you have got your zip, they go each way. So the one underneath the seam is that way, and then the one on the top is this way. I hope that makes sense. So it's almost like nesting, but look, because I've got that zip pull in between. When you clip them together, you'll kind of see. So like I say, it's gone across, and that was pretty thick, and these sides where I've got the string, the couching as well, are going to be fairly thick as well. But remember what we always say, take your stitch length up if necessary. So I'm on a 3 stitch length of 3 as I'm going around here. And then just check underneath. When I've finished, I will just double check that I have caught all of those layers before I turn it through. Remember what I said to you about leaving the zip pull slightly open. You'll see why in a minute. I mean, it wouldn't be the first time that I've forgotten to leave the zip pull open, but there we go. Just up the sides. I'm not going to box the bottom on this, but you can do. In fact, thinking about it, the pattern for the little bunny bag which the PDF is on, and all the instructions actually. But that little bunny bag with these sort of techniques would make a really, really lovely little summer handbag, wouldn't it? Especially if you did cork and string. That always looks quite nice for summer, doesn't it? So back to my gap. So like I say, I've left a gap here for turning, and then we can clip our corners. Just to ease the bulk there. And then we have to bring the whole thing through. So like I say, we've got, I can get to the zipper inside, just should have left it all the way over. There we go. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I've reached in, grabbed that bit, and then we pull the whole thing through. There we go, our favourite bit, isn't it, the birthing. Do make sure that that hole is big enough. This is one of the first things I normally make with beginners, is either a bag and then we go on to a zipper pouch very often. And I don't know why, but I always seem to have quite a lot of midwives in my classes, or nurses. So we do always have a little chuckle when we get to the birthing part and a discussion of the various alternatives to make things slightly easier. Right, there we go. But we're not going to that, hey? And look, you can see I'm going to just get my needle and poke all the corners, etc. out, make them nice and neat, front, back, and zip. And away we go. But like I say, I'm going to get in with my knitting needle and straighten all those out. So I will continue and finish up these other samples and post a picture of that. Let's come back to the front. So here we go, finished, job done. Put that in the Christmas present. I can't believe I'm talking about Christmas when it is this hot. I'm hoping I'm not looking a little bit too sweaty because it is really hot in here. And I hope you enjoyed that video and will find it useful. Maybe give some of those techniques, some of those stitches a little go. Do give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. And also, if you're watching this on catch up and you've got any questions that haven't been asked or answered, do put them in the comments, because I do always check back and will answer if you've got a question as well. And next month, which is going to be, I can't believe how fast this year is going. So we're going end of September. So I thought maybe we'd do a little something for Halloween. I'm not going to show you though, that's going to be a bit of a surprise. So keep your eyes peeled and might give you a few clues here and there. And see you hopefully next month. Do spread the word, like I say, and let us know if this is what you're enjoying, or if there's something specific you want me to go through. Take care.